What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Book Binge on the King Crusoe YouTube channel. This week, for episode 38, we are doing another review of The Gunslinger by Stephen King, being the first book in the Dark Tower series. And this is my actual final Dark Tower review and Dark Tower specifically related video. I guess this is technically cheating in terms of the stuff that I cover on the channel, but whatever. The immense uptick in the quality of this book from the original read that I did back in January versus the reread that I just did in July? Question mark? Yeah, I think it was in July. Is just insane. So let's kind of talk about why and some of the reasons for that. Keep in mind that this review, as opposed to the first one, will be a bit more spoilery. So if you actually haven't read this, and if you haven't read the whole series, you might want to hold off on this, but I think you'll be mostly safe so long as you've at least read this book. Because I would actually like to mention a few specific scenes and moments. With that being said, let's go into the first section of the video with what are the best elements of the Gunslinger. The first immediate benefit that I get in terms of the good parts of the Gunslinger after the reread is just being able to understand more of the book instead of only understanding like 50% or possibly even less of the Gunslinger the first time around. I was able to get some of the basic stuff, some of the more straightforward plot, but basically everything else was mostly flying over my head. And I suspect that that's how it tends to be for most first-time readers of the book, but on this reread, especially after finishing the series, I probably understood greater than 95% of the book this time around. That part alone makes a world of difference, but even more than just understanding more, it's just catching all of the references and the foreshadowing, because there is an absolute insane amount of that going on in the Gunslinger. It's impossible to kind of put into words how much more you can catch upon the reread as opposed to the first time around, just not only from knowing what will happen throughout the series, but also just being used to the world and characters. The book was easier to read because I understood Roland and some of the other characters that appear, and I understood the world more. If I being able to catch the foreshadowing and the references and stuff is cool, but just knowing more of the world and being part of it makes it a much more smooth reading experience overall. It's really a matter of experiencing the book as I feel like it should be experienced, since the first read is, very confusing. And this is a major series spoiler, actually, I will get into, so skip until the timestamp on the screen to the next section of this video if you have not finished the entire series. Just the whole caught is a wheel thing, and this being the beginning of a kind of circular cycle all over again for Roland after the very end of the series and the coda of the final book. It was bittersweet. It was horrible, it was amazing, it was all of these mixed emotions all at the same time, and I absolutely love it for that. The fact that the opening line of this book means so much more. It was already a really great opening line for a book in general, but just the way that it was used as the very closing line of the final book as well, meant to be the cause a wheel circle, it was very beautiful to me. And now we come to the worst section. You are now safe from spoilers here. The worst elements of the Gunslinger. Now, the book still isn't perfect, but I think I have a little bit less to complain about this time around, because the first time I reviewed this, if I'm remembering correctly, one of my major setbacks of the book, to me, was just the fact that a lot of it flies over your head. You're reading it and you're just like, what's the point of this, or what's going on? I don't understand what in the world King is talking about. That's why a lot of people say read the second book and make sure you go through that, because then you'll know if the series is for you or not overall. Going through this on the reread, that setback doesn't really mean as much to me anymore. But on the reread, there are also a couple new issues that I came across. The primary one being that some character mannerisms, I guess I will put it, seem a little bit strange this time around. Roland in particular feels very weird. He just behaves a little bit differently than he does in basically all of the other books. there are several speech patterns and actual habits displayed in him, and even another character as well, that just never came up in the remaining books. Things that I don't notice while reading the series for the first time, but rereading this book is just like, this was not a way that Roland spoke at all through the rest of the series. Why is it that he is speaking this way now? Just didn't make sense. So there's a little bit of mismatch in a tiny bit of the characterization, but it's not a major issue. It's just something that distracted me a little bit. Similarly, some of the vocabulary usage among certain characters and even in some of the descriptions are also slightly different than the rest of the series in places. It's kind of a weird thing to complain about, but you really notice it upon the reread. And then again, this will be another issue that I brought up from the original review, is that Roland constantly brings up Allie, the girl from Toll, or however he describes her, but he mentions her being the one from Toll constantly throughout the book. Again, in each chapter, he probably mentions her a handful of times. It's still really annoying this time around. Like, just trust us to remember that one character, because all the stuff that happens involving that character and that town, that place, that's one of the most memorable moments of the entire book. King, just trust us to remember that, if nothing else. I think when he did the revision for the book, he could have edited out a couple of those, but that's just a personal gripe. And now we come to my conclusion. I binged Dark Tower Book 7, the final book in the series, in about a week, and then I spent a few days rereading The Gunslinger. I'll admit, after the end of all of that, I was a little bit burnt out on the world and even the characters to some extent, but I do not regret at all choosing to reread The Gunslinger. I'm very happy that I made that decision. I don't know if I'll ever do a series reread. I know for sure at some point in the future I'll end up rereading the parts 2 and 3, Roland's flashback in Wizard and Glass, but when it comes around to the full series, quite possibly after I think finishing all of King's works, I might actually do a reread. In fact, that actually sounds like a really, really cool idea to me, to be honest. But until then, I can be even more satisfied with this book, with the series as a whole, with just the idea of the Dark Tower than I was the first time that I read this in January. Because if you watched my reading wrap up in TBR for February, when I talked about having read this in January, I actually tied this technically as being my favorite read of January alongside Return of the King, because despite not understanding a lot of what was going on, I was super into what I did understand, was really excited to continue the series. And I would say that all of that holds up, and I actually like it a lot more than I did the first time. I rated it 4 stars on Goodreads when I got around to covering it on there the first time around, but then upon the reread, I actually upticked that to a 5-star because of how much more I caught and how meaningful a lot of the references are. I mentioned this in the Dark Tower ranking video, where I actually ranked and did kind of spoilery reviews of all 7 books. Well, 8 technically if you count Win Through the Kinghole. That's not the right word. Through the Keyhole, because I did include that in that video. This book is also really cool because it has. I mentioned that it has so many references and foreshadowing, but I'm not even kidding. There's at least a few references to every single other book in the series, not counting Win Through the Keyhole, since that was written long after the fact. Just, I found it really incredible. So that's it for covering The Gunslinger for the second time. This was a little bit of a shorter video. Hope you guys will forgive me for covering it again, but I felt like it was justified because I just had so much of a different experience than I did however many months ago when I read it the first time. So, that's the end of this video. As always, check out seasonalproductions.com for all of my YouTube and writing content all in one place if you are interested in following along with me in all of my other work and all my other projects and hobbies. I'll be back again next week covering Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio, the first book in the Sun Eater series. I'm very excited for that, so be sure to check back in then. I'll see you guys next week.